talking about tax incidence. So depending on the elasticity, when we put a tax on a market, this is going to affect consumers and producers differently. And that's because of their relative elasticities. So tax incidence is the manner in which a tax burden is divided in between buyers and sellers. We talked about this before, where we had a $5 tax on a t-shirt, where you used to buy the t-shirt at $20, but now you have to buy the shirt at $23, right? So now you're paying an extra $3 for the shirt, and so your tax burden is $3. Now the producer used to get $20, but now they're only getting $18 for the shirt, so they're losing $2. So that is the consumer burden, the extra price you're paying, and the producer burden is how much they're losing. So what we're going to see here is that if the demand is more inelastic than supply, then the consumers are going to bear most of the tax burden. So the producers are still losing money than they were before, but the consumers are bearing most of the tax. For example, if the tax was $5, the consumers are paying an extra $4 and the producers are losing $1, right? So you're bearing most of the tax. But if supply was more inelastic than demand, sellers bear most of the tax. Tax burden depends on how much you are affected because of the tax. Look at what you used to pay and what you're paying now. That is your burden. Before, you used to pay $5 for jelly, now you're paying $7, so your burden is $2, right? So that's what we're looking at. Now, to illustrate this a little bit better, let's show you how sales tax works. If the price of peanut butter on the shelf says $3.50, okay, that is what the producer is getting. So this is the producer price. Now, when you go to check out, you pay $4.50. That is the consumer price. So how much of a sales tax do we have? The producer's collecting $3.50, you're paying $4.50. That $1, that's going to the government, right? Remember that the seller is actually getting $3.50 and you're paying $4.50. Okay, so therefore there's the sales tax, $1. Now, in terms of the burden side of this, we need to go before the tax. So let's look at another example. What was the price paid before tax? Well, we had our demand curve and our supply curve, and we see before tax it was at $6.50. So the price was $6. Okay. Now, because of the tax on the seller, we changed the supply curve to illustrate a new equilibrium. So this new equilibrium up here, that is what the consumers pay after the tax. It's the equilibrium. So the consumers are going to pay $8 after tax. Now, what do the producers keep? Well, this is your equilibrium. This is your quantity, all right? So this point right here, that's the supply plus the tax. So we just need to look at the supply. That one is right here, and that is at $5. Okay, all I did there to figure out what is the producer price, I looked at that quantity. What is the supply curve show us? So at this quantity here, we see that the supply curve shows us $5. All right, so how much is the sales tax? Consumers pay 8, producers keep 5, so the tax is 3. How much is the consumer burden? They used to pay 6, now they're paying 8, so they are burdened by $2. The producer used to get 6, now they're getting 5, so they're losing on $1. And so who is more inelastic? The consumer has more burden, so therefore the demand is relatively more inelastic. Thinking back to the medical goods side of this, right? When higher prices, the consumer still buys like the same quantity because they are inelastic. The same thing happens here. If the demand is more inelastic, they're not changing quantity. And so they are willing to pay that higher price. So they're bearing most of the burden because they're inelastic, right? So all in all, if the demand is more elastic, so right here, so this would be a more elastic demand, you can see that the producers are losing more money than what the consumers are bearing, right? So in this example here, because supply is more inelastic, then they have more burden. On the other one, if demand is more inelastic, you see how they have a bigger jump in price and producers have a little drop in price? That's because demand is more inelastic. So they bear most of the burden. So all in all, the idea is this: when you are more inelastic, the more tax burden you have. All right? If you wanted to calculate the elasticities, you can. You can calculate the old price and the new price to figure out the relatively elasticities for both of these curves, and you will see that demand would be more inelastic. Okay. Next, we'll talk about income elasticity and cross price elasticity. All right.